From Washington, D.C., this is Middle East Focus with Paul Salem.
Welcome to Middle East Focus. This week we're taking a slightly different tack and talking about arts and culture in the Middle East, and particularly talking with two people at MEI who lead MEI's Arts and Culture program. First, my colleague and friend Kate Seelye, who's the vice president of the Middle East Institute, where she oversees communications, outreach, and programs, and helps lead the growing arts and culture program, or leads it. She also serves on the board of the Ali Vural Ak Center for Global Islamic Studies at George Mason. Prior to that, she worked as a radio and television journalist covering the Arab world for a long time. Kate, thanks for being with us today.
It's a pleasure, Paul.
And with us as well is my friend and colleague Linz Nagy, who's the director of the Arts and Culture program here at the Middle East Institute. Lynn has worked for 15 years in international development in the Middle East. She was deputy director for Lebanon and regional projects at the British Council in Beirut. And Lynn is now at MEI and living in the U.S. Lynn, thanks for joining us in the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Kate, let me start with you. MEI and the podcast usually covers wars and politics and headache-inducing things. You lead a project on arts and culture. Why is culture important to understand the Middle East or to communicate about the Middle East?
Well, culture is really sort of the human lens into the Middle East and reflects the voices of the artists, the writers, the filmmakers, the people who really have the pulse of the region. And we decided that in Washington, there's a lot of analysis of the Middle East through a security lens, through kind of a geopolitical lens, but nobody's looking at it through the lens of artists, writers, filmmakers who, as I said, are the conscience of the region and who tell a very different story. So we thought it was about time to really sort of change the conversation and bring culture into the conversation about the broader Middle East.
I forget who said it, but that artists are the antenna of the community, and they see things and have visions of things that others do not. So they're very important sort of feelers of trends and so on. In D.C., you mentioned, yes, it was arts and culture, but this is Middle East arts and culture in D.C. Do other institutes do this?
No,
do the museums do it? Who does this stuff?
Look, there's been on and off, cultural events over the years in D.C., but nobody's done it in a sustained, committed way, Paul. So we decided there was a gap in the market, in a sense, and especially after the Arab uprisings of 2011, when there was really this cultural dynamism emerging from the region. I mean, there's always been rich culture, but it was a more sort of exciting and dynamic time. And Washington sort of got it wrong. Washington was clearly not in touch with the voices of the youth and of the region. And we thought now was a great time to start a program where we could bring artists from the region, bring them into the policy conversation, make culture a part of the policy sort of considerations in this town, introduce them to Americans, and create a platform where a deeper conversation about the region and its fullness could be had.
Okay, we'll come back to the program. Lynn, let me turn to you. Your views on why are arts and culture important today in the Arab world or the Middle East? And do you have some examples that would sort of illustrate how it is important?
Well, of course. I mean, generally speaking, broadly, arts and culture are about the most intimate things about us. It's about our identity, our culture, our food, how we present ourselves, our stories, our narrative. And, it becomes very important to understand a culture, somebody else, a nation, their story, what's important for them. So, when you start wanting to do art, you also want to explain why art is important. What is the role of the arts in the wider sort of society? Why is it important even to understand or to express political and social issues? And you mentioned, that artists are the antennas. Not only they are the antennas, but they are the people who have the ability to propel themselves and think how it can be different for themselves and their communities.
Like they can be change agents.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is why they are important, but that is why also their work is sometimes...
So in a way, they're antenna and they're also broadcasters, right?
They're broadcasters, they're antenna, they are conscious, they're people who step in to express hope, but also to express pain when language fails.
Well, let's concretize it a bit. Could you give an example of or two of an artist, or obviously the arts
Of
are
course.
numerous. Tell us a story.
Of course,
that,
and we've hosted, that's what we did when we first started the Arts and Culture
Give
program.
me an example.
At MEI. We hosted some of the voices like Lara Baladi. Lara is one of the prominent Egyptian artists. She travels a lot. She's now in the US, I believe. And her work is really about collecting history and interpreting it in a way that becomes very interactive to give power to people to contribute interactively to how their culture is collected and represented. So it's a very visual way of presenting the history of Egypt through the stories of people. And that can take the shape of an exhibition, of an interactive. Now, I don't want to speak for Lara and describe her work, but, her work is a very powerful tool that can actually give power to people to actually reclaim their narrative and put it out in a way that they are, the owners of the stories, and they're interpreting important historical moments in their own trajectory in the way they perceive it, not in the way somebody else wants to frame it. There is another artist who we have hosted as well, who's Iraqi, Wafa Bilal, who also expresses through his work the pain of his people, the pain of displacement, of war, of horror. So his work, he uses his own body. Sometimes it's very hard sometimes also. So, that is another way of making people aware of the magnitude of the human impact of war and displacement, of destruction. In a way sometimes that, politics cannot.
Kate, could you give an example
if I may,
also?
Yes. I mean, we hosted Hisham Matar. Hisham Matar, Pulitzer Prize winning Libyan author. He has done more to highlight the human rights
through
abuses
his novels,
in Libya than any other single human being. And his autobiography, for which he won the Pulitzer, did more to introduce people to another side of Libya than any other nonfiction book that I'm aware of. So these are the kind of voices that allow Washington to connect with the region that has been so long stereotyped, so long seen in a negative light, so long dehumanized that it's become ridiculous. And so we put these voices out there for others to see and to start this conversation so we can take it, as you well know, Paul, to another level where we need to go with this conversation.
Yeah, I'm struck. I was recently reading about the impact of Picasso's Guernica, his painting of this one episode in the Spanish Civil War, and that everybody knew about the Spanish Civil War in the newspapers and everything. But Guernica, his piece of art, became the frame through which people looked at war and civil war, not just the Spanish Civil War. So a great example of art, impacting how people see these conflicts and these wars. I want to, before getting into the impact in Washington, which you said, talked about, I want to ask Lynn, arts and culture don't get much attention in the Arab world or the Middle East. So tell me a bit about that. You were there, working on that. I know Kay was there as well. Before getting to communicating to Washington and all of that, where do you see arts and artists in today's Middle East? I mean, it looks like a pretty grim picture. Is there any...
Absolutely.
I mean, grim, not that they're, they're there and doing their best, but is there any uptake? Who's listening to them? How much freedom do they have?
Well,
you can speak freely.
Yes. I mean, this is a hard time for artists in the Middle East. This is a time where their work becomes even more important. Are there people who are listening to them? I feel that, yes, there are. Because there are people who are listening to them, they are under threat the way they are. Otherwise, nobody would care. But yes, I mean, Europe has been heavily invested over the years in sort of building the infrastructure that have allowed many of the artists to grow and flourish and pushing the boundaries of their work further. But, there's also another aspect. I don't only want to talk about that aspect of the arts, which is very, very important. There is also something else that is happening in the arts now in the Middle East, which is also the realization that the arts and culture can be a great potential for the creative industries as well.
Like economically,
it's an economic potential
it's an
for
industry,
a lot of
absolutely
for a lot of countries to look at, with a growing young population that is looking for more jobs. And every time, the creative economy that started in the UK started because people were looking, economists, the country was looking for a new economy. And that's why they went towards the creative industries.
Yeah, I recall, I think in the 60s in France, the two biggest exports was Renault and Brigitte Bardot. I'm talking in real economic export terms.
Absolutely.
Hollywood is a big export of the United States. So, business sector.
It is the arts and culture. There are many studies out there that talk about the contribution of arts and culture to GDPs and to the creation of jobs. Of course, that requires as well, infrastructure work, education reform, freedom of expression, the ability to grow innovation and creativity without having restrictions, etc. But just to say that, are there people listening to arts and culture? Yes. Is it important to listen to it? Yes, it is important for
And it's also an industry.
It is also an industry, but it is also a way to shine a light that is a different light on the region.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Kate.
But if I may, Arab artists have never been so represented on the international stage
as today.
We see Arab artists showing at the Los Angeles County Museum, at the Brooklyn Museum, at the Sackler here in Washington, all over the United States at a level that's never before been seen. And this is being recognized because they're performing at an international level. Their contemporary art is as good as any contemporary art you will find globally.
Fantastic.
And that's being recognized by local governments, especially in the Gulf, who realize that their artists are a form of soft power for them. And so we've seen Saudi Arabia make this huge push in the arts to support their artists, to support their exhibitions, not just in the United States, but in Europe as well. Same for the UAE.
And they're investing as part of Vision 2030.
They're investing millions, hundreds of millions, as is the UAE. And I think, Lynn knows more about this than I do. This is having a ripple effect, and this is helping all Arab artists, not just Gulf artists, because, the big art shows that are being hosted by Dubai and Sharjah, all Arab artists are being shown and represented there. So we've never seen Arab artists so embraced by a kind of a global art elite as we have today.
Lynn?
Can I add to what Kate said? Is that, they're being shown as well more internationally because the world is more connected, because the artists during the transitions in the Middle East have used
transitions haven't gone very well.
Yes, but they have happened.
Yes,
and things are not the same. Sometimes their
change has come.
Yes, change has happened.
Yeah,
and so they have taken their work in a different way because they had to.
Yeah,
and they found themselves at the forefront of expressing the aspirations of
and new
younger
technology also.
Generations. Absolutely, and unfortunately, a lot of the problems are sort of concentrated in the region, which makes the work of the Arab artist very raw, very real, and very intense, and very vibrant, and therefore very interesting. And so they are getting recognition, and people, want to show their work.
Kate, the program, when did it start at MEI, the Arts and Culture Program? What does it do? What does it consider part of the arts, and what are the categories? I mean, it's obviously there's visual arts, there's film. Tell us a bit programmatically what.
Sure. Well, we launched the program in 2014, brought Lynn on as our wonderful director, began small, sort of part-time, but really with a very small budget, but with a focus on really two things, kind of hosting conversations at the intersection of art and policy. One of our first big conversations, which I was very proud of, was a conversation titled "The Role of Arts as Soft Power in a Changing Middle East." We've done panels like, the role of arts in peace building, the role of arts in empathy, women in the arts. So we really sort of highlight these conversations, bring in not just Arab artists and speakers, but speakers from other cultural institutions in the U.S., from academia, to have a very sort of multidisciplinary kind of conversation around.
So that's the
role of the
discussions
arts.
about the arts.
So that's the discussion about arts. And then, of course, we would like to do a lot of cultural programming. Musical performances, film performances, but those are so dependent on money. But we've had luck getting grants from the British Council. ADMAF, the Abu Dhabi Music and Arts Foundation, funded a wonderful program we did at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, highlighting Kulthum, the great Egyptian singer, with Arab musicians, women musicians, reinterpreting Kulthum. So we do a balance of conversations and culture.
And how do you think that's been received in Washington?
Oh my gosh. I mean, all of our events have been sold out. The ADMAF program on Kulthum had a waiting list. Our installation of live art looking at the Syria crisis through the lens of this wonderful Lebanese artist Tanya Khouri was sold out.
That was a very moving
Indeed,
exhibit.
it was.
Yeah, I went to it. It was very moving.
Yeah, the panels are at capacity. We've had film screenings that we thought, would draw 70 people, and suddenly 130 people show up, and we're scrambling to set extra seats. So there is a hunger in this town to look at the Middle East through this different lens, to connect with the Middle East through the voices of artists. And when I say artists, I mean artists writ large.
Yeah. Novelists,
yes,
poets, musicians,
exactly.
visual
So
artists.
we could do more, and there would be more room to do more.
How do you reach out beyond Washington, Lynn? I mean, there are events physically in Washington, but America, the West, the world, is interested.
I mean, we've ran programs occasionally in New York when we've had funding to do that. Those were very successful too. But we took some of our programming across the United States, and that has had a lot of success too. There is a hunger also in smaller cities, not as cosmopolitan as Washington, D.C., to also access this kind of culture. They get so little. So they're always very interested in seeing.
I know that some of the Middle Eastern movies have had a big impact at the Oscars this year. One of the Lebanese movies, the insult Ziad Doueiri's movie, was nominated. What other films have made a big impact, you think, in this country, in the U.S.?
Well, Nadine Lebaki also has recently
another Lebanese
film.
Capernaum.
Yes. And
what's the title?
Capernaum.
Yes, Capernaum. And there was a Saudi film, the lady who did a Saudi movie.
Sure, Wajda.
Wajda was 2 years ago, and that had a lot of success. There is a lot of documentary. There is an exploding art scene in the region,
and a great appetite for it.
And what our program does is try to bring it to Washington, D.C., to give people a flavor of this vibrant art scene, but also to shine a different light, as Kate said. And through, those 4 years, we've managed to build a reputation for ourselves.
Also, MEI obviously is, new building is being built now. It should open in May of next year. Tell us a bit about what's in it for arts and culture.
Well, the most exciting development for us is that we are going to be home to the only art gallery devoted to modern and contemporary Middle Eastern art. That's art, photography, and video from North Africa through the Levant to Iran, Turkey, and Israel. So it's going to be unique.
So there'll be a gallery in the building.
A gallery in the building. Hoping to put on 4 exhibitions a year, surrounded by very rich programs, artist talks, panels, films, to really amplify the message of each particular show.
So it'll be like also a little, kind of an art museum.
It is. It's going to be an art museum open to the public. So
great.
Free and open to the public.
We look forward to that building being finished. And when it is, we'll invite you all to art openings in that new building. If people want to learn more about it, where would they learn more about this program? It's on the website, right?
Yes, we have a
where would they go to?
Web page. Go to the MEI homepage, and you'll find I think it's under programs. There's a drop down. You'll see arts and culture. We also have a Twitter handle. MEI Arts Culture.
MEI Arts Culture.
A lot of people are following that.
And if there are artists who want to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Email.
Email Kate Seelye or Linz Nagy.
Sneige at mei.edu. My email is on the website.
And if you're listening and you're an enormous funder and would like to fund the arts, please send us an email.
Oh, absolutely.
That would be helpful as well. Lynn and Kate, thank you so much for being with us today and for talking about this very important and fast-growing field and for all the work you do in arts and culture. Kate, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Paul.
And Lynn, thank you as well.
Thank you, Paul.
And to our audience, thank you for tuning in this week, listening to something different, not the usual thing that we talk about. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.
This has been a presentation of the Middle East Institute. To support MEI's programs and podcasts, please donate at www.mei.edu. Thank you for your support.